Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And who dat? And we got some main course for you. Not the type of main course that's very tasty to me. Not something I like to eat. And I'm talking about a loss here because the Saints ended up losing a horrible game and letting the Green Bay Packers come back from 17 nothing and had them come back all the way back in the fourth quarter with 18 points scored and consecutive points scored in the fourth quarter to have them win the game by 1 point. And on top of that, to add injury to insult, your quarterback, I guess depending on what time, what probably be after the game when they won, but during the game, it would have been add insult to injury, depending on which way you want to phrase that. Your starting quarterback, Derek Carr, also got hurt on the 11th sack he's taken in the 11 quarters he's played this year. But I've talked about how uh, the close games that the Saints won the first two games. They've been kind of skating on thin ice and winning those games. The defense looking great, and the offensive line was looking pretty shaky in both those two games. But still, just getting the wins in those games is such an amazing feeling. You feel great when your team can pull out a win or pull off a comeback and and win those nail biters. But just as much as a win from a game like that can feel good, losing a game like that is just such a hollow feeling. You just feel empty inside after losing a game like that, and you're just tossing and turning at night trying to sleep and thinking about moments in the games where just this one play went this way, or maybe the play calling went this way. Then they should have won. They should have won. And seeing all these graphics on social media about there only being three teams that are undefeated. I'm trying to think of who they are. I think it's the Dolphins, the 49ers, and the Philadelphia Eagles being the only teams left undefeated. Like those, I see those graphics. I just want to puke because the Saints should be a part of that group of undefeated teams because they should have won this game. There's really no excuse for them not winning this game. And this game was just a whirlwind of emotions, ups and downs, and not just during the game, but even before the game, the game day, because they were talking about I, on my previous podcast, I was talking about how the Saints had like injuries, in the secondary. They were missing Paulson Adebo. Marcus May was out with suspension. The run game may not be as good, or they may not even be able to pass block as good because they're missing Foster Moreau. So I was taking the Saints injuries as a big detriment to them in this game. But then the injury report, the inactive list comes out for Green Bay, and all their players that they had on their injury report on Friday that were listed as questionable, like none of them played. Like Jenkins, guard didn't play. Bakhtiari, left tackle didn't play. Their Aaron Jones, their best running back, didn't play. Uh, Christian Watkins, their best wide receiver, didn't play. So it was just like I went from thinking, oh, the Saints are probably going to lose this because their secondary is going to be bad and they're not going to be able to run as well or pass block as well without Foster Monroe. And then all those inactives come away, and I was thinking, oh man, like there's no reason they shouldn't win this game. Like they should toast to a win in this game. And early on, it looked like that was what was going to happen. And then they're talking about like there's no excuse for them not to win this game. Well, when your starting quarterback gets injured and you have all the momentum at the time, and then he gets injured, all the momentum swings to the team that actually has a healthy starting quarterback. And it seemed like the Saints just kind of imploded from that point. Uh, I know people like looking just at stats wise and things like that, and just numbers. The numbers between Derek Carr and Jameis Winston since he's been here and since Derek Carr's been here haven't really been much different or much better, but it's just different. There's a different feel when Derek Carr is the starter. But Anyways, let's kind of get into this. Let's get into kind of my play by play and things that I thought kind of went wrong and kind of changed the whole momentum of this game. So we're gonna go through my play by play and key moments there. So can I get a menu and talking about Carr getting sacked and taking already being sacked 11 times in this season, probably hit probably twice as many times as that. But first moment of the game, the Saints all three games this year, the Saints have lost the coin toss, and I've always had to get the ball first. But so it's the Saints' first drive. It's 14:31 second one of the first quarter. It's 3rd and 10, and Carr is sacked by Kenny Clark. And people want to just chastise Trevor Penning for being like the worst offensive lineman on this offensive line, and him being the whole reason the offensive line is wrong, bad. But I've already said that, and after the last game against the Titans, that it's definitely not Trevor Penning. It's the entire line. The entire offensive line is horrible because on this play it was McCoy, Eric McCoy that gave up this sack to Kenny Clark. He just completely whiffed on the inside move by Kenny Clark and just gave up an easy sack to Kenny Clark. And he's like your second highest paid offensive lineman on the team, a second round pick, has like a $60 million contract, and he just got completely schooled. And he's a veteran. He's been with this team 4 or 5 years now, and just looked terrible on that play, on that snap. So that just killed that drive for the Saints. But luckily, the Saints defense was elite. Even though they allowed 18 unanswered, and that pretty much what was the deciding factor. Obviously losing by 1 point, they still played great. For 3 quarters they played great, I guess. But when you're on the field the whole time, you can't expect them not to get a little tired and a little worn down. And like I said, it just takes the air out of you when you lose your starting quarterback. So, but they played good. So it's at the 10:52 mark of the first quarter. It's a 4th and 2, and Green Bay they're around midfield. Green Bay decides to go for it this early in the game. Their first drive, they try to go for it, and they do this little trick play where it's thrown to the running back or the receiver, and then the running back receiver throws it back to Jordan Love, but Jordan Love like drops, doesn't catch the throwback, and then when he's like catching the ball to try to throw it, he's like slipping and falling down against the grass or something at Lambeau Field was slick, or he didn't have the right cleats in, and he had a receiver wide open. It was just lucky that the play, everything that could have went wrong on that trick play did go wrong, because if he would have just been able to set his feet and throw a decent pass, he would have hit a receiver wide open. It was just that he was like split leg falling down on the play. That didn't end up being a big play, a big 4th down conversion, and a big play for the Green Bay Packers early on in the game. But as we know, things changed later on, where things every play started going their way. So then it's the 6:44 mark of the first quarter. The Saints drive down the field. They didn't have far to go because of the failed conversion, fourth down conversion by Green Bay, and it's a 3rd and 5, and the Saints are in the red zone, and Carr hits Jimmy Graham for an 8-yard touchdown, and that's just having nostalgia flashbacks. It's just amazing to see Jimmy Graham make a play, and it makes you feel a little bit better about tight end because you're missing Foster Monroe. So one of your tight ends makes one of the first plays of the game and gets a touchdown there, and that just felt like the Saints had all the momentum at that point. Definitely had all the juice. Jimmy Graham doing a fake Lambeau leap, and I felt good about the game. Even though the previous sack on the first drive made me think like, oh, here we go again with the sacks. They're going to give up another 4 sacks, but uh, but the Saints, their defense continued to hold and look good. So the Green Bay Packers on their next drive really didn't do much. But so then it's the end of the quarter, and it's going into the first quarter or the second quarter. So it's the 15-minute mark of the second quarter. The Saints get to a 3rd and 9, and Carr is sacked by Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary, and that just ends that drive, snuffs out that drive. But Rashawn Gary, that's a name to highlight. That's a name to highlight. He was one of their players that was on their injury report that did end up playing. And I already knew that he was probably their best pass rusher, their best edge rusher, outside linebacking edge rusher. After that one sack by him, they probably should have started identifying him or changing plays at the line or just changing how the blocking was going to be for the rest of the game after Rashawn Gary got that sack. But for some reason, maybe they did and they just weren't able to execute. But he ended up being probably the main reason the Saints ended up losing this game. So the Saints defense, they continue to play great and get another stop, and they're punting from in their own territory. It's a 10:47 mark of the second quarter. It's a 4th and 15 because on top of everything else that the Packers were doing early on in the game, with just not looking great on offense or doing anything, that they were getting penalized a lot as well. That's another reason why, besides the Derek Carr injury, that the Saints probably shouldn't have lost this game, is because the Saints were, for at least the first 3 quarters, were like not penalized at all, and the seemed like every other play that the Green Bay Packers were getting penalized. So, anyways, it's a 4th and 15, and they punt it away, and Rashid Shaheed returns it for a 72-yard punt return. Like, was just been waiting for that to finally happen, and so that puts the Saints up 14-0 early in the second quarter, and they're dancing in the back of the end zone after the touchdown. Like I said, they look like after that happened, it felt like they were going to rout the Green Bay Packers. It felt like they were going to score 30 points on them, like probably score like 30-7 or something, like they did 2 years ago when they beat them. It felt like it was going to be 38-3 all over again. But that was really the last big highlight for the Saints, like positive moment on offensively, at least for the Saints. And then it's a 4th and 59 of the second quarter. It's a 3rd and 9, and Jordan Love is sacked by Alontae Taylor, knocking him out of field goal range. But he threw. I'm trying to think. No, they didn't call intentional grounding because they just ruled that he was down. His forward progress had been stopped and he was down. So that they were in Saints territory, like they were in field goal range, and that knocked them out of field goal range. So the Saints continue the shutout. It's still 14-0, and then it's the 36-second mark of the second quarter, and it's 1st and 10, and Carr hits Olave with a 27-yard gain that takes them down to Green Bay's 7-yard line, and Chris Olave makes another crazy one-handed catch. And with all the momentum and how the game's been going, I felt that there's no way they're not going to score a touchdown and go up 21-0 here. And that's all they would have needed to win this game, was a touchdown in this situation. But they just weren't able to do it. It's the 14-second mark of the second quarter. It's 3rd and goal, and the Saints are still, they didn't move like the ball at all. They're still at the Green Bay 7-yard line, and Carr is incomplete to Chris Olave, and it looked like Carr kind of singled in a little bit on Olave on this play, because it looked kind of, it's always kind of after the play, you see it from a different angle. It looked like Michael Thomas was open in the back of the end zone, but looked like Carr may have been targeting, zoning in on one player, staring down his receiver a little bit on that play and not going through his reads. So then it's the 10-second mark of the second quarter. It's 4th and goal, and the Saints just have to hit a 25-yard field goal, and Blake Grupe does that. So they're up 17-0 And really, at that point, I think there's no way, unless they just completely implode or maybe lose their starting quarterback for the game. There's no way they're going to lose this game. But I've seen this story before. I've seen this movie a million times. I've seen this show before, so I'm not surprised really what ended up happening in this game. And I was too confident. I had buddies texting me and sending me emojis and telling me how good the Saints looked. I felt kind of uneasy when I was replying to these text messages and comments because it made me feel like I'm about to jinx the Saints. I'm about to catch some karma for talking that noise a little too early in a Saints game because I know in a game like this and just a Saints game in general, until there's 0-0-0 and the Saints have at least 1 point lead, they haven't won the game yet. Like it's not over because there's still a half to play. But so Green Bay, they get the ball first, and and they didn't move it too much. They moved it a little bit, and then it's the 13 minute and 25-second mark of the third quarter. It's a third and 14. So the Green Bay Packers continue to shoot themselves in the foot with penalties. And Love drops back and just throws a deep one out there, just lays it out for anyone to go up and get. And Lonnie Johnson Jr., one of the safeties, backup safeties in there for Marcus May and probably sharing snaps with Jordan Howdy, comes down with an interception. So you think, oh, the Saints have all the momentum here. All they're going to need to do is maybe get one more field goal or even score one more touchdown with this drive, and it's going to be over. It's going to be knell and coffins to the Green Bay Packers with their fans already booing them out of the stadium. But then it's the 10-minute and 53-second mark of the third quarter. It's a 3rd and 9, and Saints are around midfield. Derek Carr, he drops back, and he's kind of holding on to the ball a little bit too long here. People always want to set fire to the offensive line and talk bad about the offensive line and Trevor Penning. And he held on to the ball too long here, honestly. He probably held on to the ball for maybe 5 seconds. So he had time to throw. Maybe he was waiting for some deeper routes to develop because it was a 3rd and 9, but he should have just thrown this away. He should have thrown this away, or he should have just turtled up and take the sack. But instead, Rashawn Gary jumps on his back and slams him to the ground. I'm honestly surprised that wasn't a penalty, a roughing the passer penalty, because it was so unnecessary for Rashawn Gary to jump the backpack man, to jump on his back like a backpack and slammed him to the ground, where he slammed onto his shoulder and slammed his head on the side of the turf, on the ground there. And the second I seen him rolling around and injured, I was thinking, oh man, like this game's over. They're gonna lose now. They're gonna blow this now, and we all know what happens. But so Jameis Winston comes in, and it's the 26 mark of the third quarter. It's a 4th and 6. Jameis Winston and the run game, they were able to move it a little bit, and they elected to punt here because they were in range for a 55-yard field goal, but they decided to punt here. So that's very conservative, or not having faith in your rookie kicker. I was kind of wondering, like, what are they doing here? And there's no guarantee Blake Grupe would have made that field goal, but with how the defense was still playing at that point, I think you probably should have elected to kick the field goal there, because that's really all they would have needed. And at this point in the game, they're still up 17-0. I know it's a long field goal, but there wouldn't have been quite as much pressure on Blake Grupe to kick this field goal than obviously the one that he ended up having to kick at the end of the game. So they punted there. Seemed kind of odd, And so the Green Bay Packers, they finally kind of start moving the ball a little bit towards the end of the third quarter, and it comes down to it's a 15 minute mark of the fourth quarter. It's a 4th and 2, and Love is incomplete. They turn it over on down. So the Saints are going into the fourth quarter with a 17-0 lead. Like I'm feeling pretty good here. That was one of my things. That was my mark I was wanting to hit in this game, is to at least, if they don't have Derek Carr, they don't score any more points, at least take that 17-point lead, 17-0 lead into the fourth quarter, because I thought they were going to give up points on that drive. I thought they were probably going to complete that, get the fourth down conversion and maybe get a touchdown, or at least get closer, for a chip shot field goal. But they don't. They turned it over. So, I thought the Saints might be able to hold this out, maybe be able to hold out and win the game. But then, it's been Jameis Winston in the game, and he hasn't really done a lot for the Saints, besides on the first drive that he had where he got him in field goal range. So they just pretty much go like 3 and out, like on like almost every possession kind of after that. They just have to punt like on 5 straight possessions. So it's the the so it's 11 minute and 3 second mark of the fourth quarter. It's a 4th and 7, and on this drive, it was the drive where it kind of started to kind of look like the Green Bay Packers were kind of heating up a little bit, and it looked like the Saints defense was playing a little soft. It kind of reminded me on that drive, looking back at highlights and looking back at the game, where they were just kind of playing like prevent at the end of the game against Carolina, because they were throwing passes. A lot of them were going to the sidelines, and they were able to get out of bounds. And so it's a 4th and 7. I think this was almost unlucky for the Saints that this wasn't a 4th and short situation, so that Green Bay may try to go for it again and not get it. But it ended up being 4th and 7, and the Green Bay Packers elected to just kick the field goal, to make it a 2-score lead, a 2-touchdown lead. And so they kicked the 38-yard field goal, and it's still 17-3, 17-3, and there's only like 11 minutes left in the game. Saints should be able to hold out there, you would think. So then at the 10-minute mark, 10-minute and 18-second mark of the fourth quarter, it's a 1st and 10. And Taysom Hill has a good run to pick up a first down. He picked up about 14, 15 yards here, but Michael Thomas gets caught with a hole where he's holding on the safety or the defensive back, grabbing his arm, and that's really why it led to being a 15-yard run, 14-yard run by him in a first down, because without that hold, it probably would have been like, maybe only like an 8-yard gain or something. So then it's the 10-second mark of the fourth quarter. It's a 1st and 14. And I really felt like at this moment, I know it's a 1st and 14, and people are hard on the team for being conservative and just trying to hold out and hang on to the win. But it's a 1st and 14. I felt the Saints probably should have like ran it here, at least run it on first down, maybe see if you can pick up like 4 yards or something to make it a 2nd and 10 or something, and just try to continue to run the clock here. But instead, they elect to pass, and who shows up and gets another sack for his 3rd sack of the game, Rashawn Gary. And they were in a jumbo package here. They had it was Andres Pete and Ryan Ramczyk, and then you had your swing tackle Landon Turner on the end here, and they still gave up a sack. For some reason, they didn't double team Rashawn Gary like they probably should have been. It probably should have been a double team on Rashawn Gary by Ryan Ramczyk and Landon Turner and Landon Young. Landon Young gave up a sack on Winston, and on that sack, it looked like Jameis Winston looked like Rashawn Gary got a little bit of Jameis Winston's field goal, a face mask. So I'm surprised that there wasn't a roughing passer or field goal or face mask call on that play, but of course there wasn't. And then the Packers end up getting the ball back, and this is when the Saints penalties started to rack up a little bit, and this was like the worst possible thing that could happen on this next drive, is getting these penalties and the Green Bay Packers not having to drive down the field to get their touchdown. It just took like no time off the clock because of these big penalties. And this kind of goes back to how I felt about this game going into it, because the Saints were missing Paulson Adebo. They were missing uh, Marcus May, and it finally came back to bite him because Taylor, he was playing great all game, getting pass breakups, getting sacks from nickels position off of nickel blitzes. But then at the 8:27 mark of the fourth quarter, it's a 1st and 10, and Alontae Taylor, here he is. He draws a big pass interference for a big gain, and those penalties. No, the clock's not running, so that takes like no time off the clock. And then like right after that, just back to back here, big pass interference calls. It's a 8:20 mark of the fourth quarter. It's a 1st down after the penalty. Isaac Gainham draws another pass interference call. That's another big one, that gets them down in the Saints territory. And like I've been saying here, it doesn't run any time off the clock. That's like the worst thing. Like if they could have made the Packers like drive down the field and use some time on just that drive alone and not get those big penalties called against them, they probably would have won. So then it's the 8:08 mark of the fourth quarter. It's a 3rd and 10, so they have maybe a chance to stop them. Maybe make them think about kicking another field goal, or then maybe having to go for it on 4th and down. But no, Love hits Jaden Reed over the middle for an 11-yard 1st down. So the drive continues. Then it's the 6:58 mark of the fourth quarter. And the Packers are down in the Saints red zone. They're in the goal to go situation. It's 4th and goal, and Demario Davis, out of all players, one of your best defensive player, misses a tackle on Love for a 2-yard touchdown. And that's when I finally just felt like they're definitely, I already felt that way, that they were going to lose this game after Carr went down, but I definitely felt like it's over. They're going to lose. Might as well quit watching. But of course, I continue to watch. And then this was very reminiscent of the Raiders game, and like the season opener against the Raiders in 2016. They decided to go for 2 points, a 2-point conversion here. So with their next score, they could win. I think with the Raiders, they went for a 2-point conversion at the end of the game that actually put them up 1 point. But they did this because I think the Green Bay Packers coach knew that the Saints were completely inept on offense at this point with Jameis Winston in, and that if they get the ball back a couple more times and are able to get a touchdown, that would be enough to win. And they ended up being right, so they converted the 2-point conversion to Samori Toure, and it was on. And who was it completed on? I was just talking about the Saints. One of the Saints' best defensive players, Mario Davis, missing the tackle on the 2-yard touchdown. Well, it's completed on Marshawn Lattimore, who's been like pretty much shut down, one of the best corners in the league. But no, he gives up the 2-point conversion, and that's 2 weeks in a row towards the end of the game that the Saints have given up a 2-point conversion. They gave up one in the game against the Carolina Panthers that made that game closer than it should have been as well. So they need to be working. I know the defense has been good, and it's amazing. You can't really blame this loss on them, or just not solely on them, but they need to definitely be working on 2-point conversion defense, because that's the second one in 2 weeks that gave up. So that's just ridiculous that this game ended up being a 6-point game at this point. It was 17-11. So the Saints are just hanging on for dear life to try to win this game. So then it's the Saints get the ball back. It's the 5:36 mark of the fourth quarter. It's 3rd and 3, and Jameis Winston he had time to throw on this play. I don't know who he was looking for, or just no routes developed, but he just sells it kind of out of bounds, like he's throwing it away. And I know the offensive line is bad, and your quarterbacks under this offensive line are maybe seeing ghosts. I don't really know, but so he just throws it away here, and like it's a 3rd and 3 here, and the Saints are trying to run the clock. I really don't understand why they didn't run it. Like, why didn't you run it with Taysom Hill, or why didn't you run it with Kendra Miller, who was, towards the end of the third quarter was starting to look kind of good. It looked like looked like the running game in general was starting to kind of heat up at the end of the third, towards the end of the third quarter with Tony Jones Jr. and Kendra Miller. They were doing pitch plays, or when they do a run and there was nothing in the middle, Kendra Miller was like bouncing it outside, and they were getting pretty good gains. So I don't, just to try to run time here, and if nothing else, or maybe get it to a shorter distance, maybe like a 4th and 1 or a 4th and 2 or something, and maybe give you the idea of maybe trying to go for it, but they try to throw it instead, and they had time to throw and just couldn't find anyone. So then the Packers, this is going to be the killer here, killer drive, already had the one drive where they didn't use up any time, so they still have a decent amount of time to come back and take the lead. So it's a fourth, 4 minute and 28 seconds of the fourth quarter. It's a 1st and 10, and Love rolls out of the pocket to the left and takes off for a 25-yard gain where Lattimore had a chance to tackle him, probably just hold him to maybe just like a 10, 15-yard run, but he ends up picking up like an extra 10 yards because I think Lattimore was just being boneheaded on this play, thought that he was just going to scamper out of bounds, but he didn't. He stayed in bounds and went uh, down the field another 10 yards and got into Saints territory on that play. So then it's a 4 minute and 13 seconds of the fourth quarter. It's 2nd and 10, and Love drops back and goes deep for a 30-yard completion to Jaden Reed, which I think that was completed on Isaac Yadam, who he's one of the fill-ins. He's one of the fill-ins for Paulson Adebo. So that's what I spoke about in my pregame podcast, is that the Saints are going to be thin in the secondary, and that's going to end up coming back to bite him. Well, it did. It did on the penalties, and it did on that 30-yard yard completion to Jaden Reed there to get deep into the Saints territory. So then it's the 2 minute and 49-second mark of the fourth quarter. It's a 3rd and 3. So if the Saints could maybe get a stop here, it would lead to a situation where they're going to have to decide about going for it on 4th down, but don't have to worry about it because Love hits an 8-yard touchdown to Romeo Doubs to the Packers. So, and I think that was on Isaac Yadam as well. And then so the Packers lead 18-17, and just the injury bug bit them before this game and then bit them in this game. So then the Saints get it back, and I thought maybe the Saints could, Jameis Winston, here's your chance, kind of like in the week 1 last year against the Falcons. Here's your chance to get a comeback win. So it's the 2 minute and 33-second mark of the fourth quarter. It's a 2nd and 5. Jameis Winston drops back and hits a 38-yard pass to Chris Olave to get them into Green Bay Packers territory. So I was thinking maybe a comeback. I was starting to feel kind of good, not overly confident. I felt even if the Saints did get in field goal range, and they made the field goal to go up by 2 points, I just felt that it wouldn't have mattered if there had been just 1 minute on the clock. That Green Bay would probably march right back down the field, probably assisted by some defensive penalties, and kick a game-winning field goal anyways. But then the drive continues, and Jameis Winston hits Olave again for like a 10-yard completion, and that gets them like to the Green Bay Packers like 32-yard line. And then they decide to throw it. I think now they went for it. They ran it with Taysom Hill and only got 2 yards. So then it's 3rd and 8. But then they just decided to throw it the next 2 plays. Like honestly, in that situation, I feel as if they should have ran it at least on 2nd down to try to get maybe a little bit closer, or at least try to set it up to where it's where your kicker likes to kick it from, because I think it's probably harder for right-legged kickers to kick from the left hash, because then they have to kind of angle it to the right. So I think if they would have been able to just run it, try to get in the middle there, so the kicker can just kick it right down the middle instead of having to angle it. That's what happened. So they were incomplete on 2nd down, or they ran it for a 2-yard gain on 2nd down, and then were incomplete on So first down, they ran it for a 2 yard run, and then second down they were incomplete, and then they threw it to the far hash on third down to Michael Thomas for just like a 2 yard gain, and that set them up for a field goal, a 46-yard field goal at the 1 minute and 10 second mark of the fourth quarter. It's a 4th and 6, and I already knew Blake Rupe was going to miss it here, even though how good he's been so far, not missing any kicks and just not really looking like a rookie. And he'd already hit a 50-yarder this year, but I just knew like this is about as much pressure that you can put on a rookie kicker as possible. That's why they probably should have kicked it earlier in the game, but he misses it. Like I said, he's kicking it from the far hash, the left far hash, so he has to kind of overcompensate to try to kick it so it doesn't go wide left and it ends up going wide right. And that's pretty much the end of the game. That was the end of the game, and man, very deflating and very depressing way to lose a game. Giving up a 17-point lead when it looked like you had everything under control. And so let's talk about the offensive line a little bit here, because I think that's what everyone's screaming about. And on top of screaming about the offensive line, they're also talking about the coaching staff. Pete Carmichael and Dennis Allen. I don't think you can get on Dennis Allen too much on this because the only thing that he was maybe a little too cautious on, conservative on, was not kicking the 55-yarder in the game. But I mean, he called a good defense until the fourth quarter, of course. So I think a lot of people are probably calling for Pete Carmichael's head. But let's just talk about the offensive line here, because I've been kind of a defender a little bit of Penning, Trevor Penning, and for like pressures and sacks given up. So we'll start with the most here. Ryan Ramczyk only gave up 3 pressures, 2 of them being sacks, and then McCoy gave up 2 pressures, 1 of them being sacks, and then Hurst gave up 2 pressures, and then Landon Young gave up 1 pressure and then the 1 sack, and then Pete gave up a pressure, and then Ruiz, who I think that probably hurt the offensive line because he went out because he didn't give up any pressures, but he only played 10 snaps. So people want to talk real bad about Trevor Penning being like the whole reason the offensive line is bad. It's the whole line, and hell, it's your right tackle who's getting paid $93 million a year, who was the worst in this game, and he was probably, I think he gave up the sack that got Derek Carr hurt as well. So this kind of highlighting the offensive line, because that seems to be everything anyone wants to talk about. You definitely can't put it on one player. So I don't know if that's coaching or that the players that are all like first and second round picks just need to play better, or what it is. But it won't matter if Derek Carr comes back from injury or not if they don't get that figured out, and they probably won't have much of a chance to beat the Buccaneers next Sunday if that doesn't get solved. And it would have been nice really would have been nice to have won this game, at least be 3-0 with your quarterback going down, because I was thinking when he went down that it was either season-ending shoulder injury. Like that's what I was thinking it was going to be, because the report came out first that, oh, he's not in concussion protocol. People thought that was like a really good thing, which long term for a player's health it is, but for the right now, it being a shoulder injury is probably worse than a minor concussion, just with the ability to be able to play and get on the field. Because I'm thinking shoulder injury, it's going to be a broken collarbone or a torn rotator cuff, and it's going to be season over. But it's come out since then that it's just a sprain, AC joint sprain, a sprain, and those can keep a quarterback out or a player out. It's a wide range. I guess there's different grades. There's first, second, and third grades on how bad those can be. But you could be out anywhere from a week to 6 weeks with that. But it's not going to matter if they're not going to be able to protect Jameis Winston, depending on how long Derek Carr is out, to see if he can get at least maybe 1 or 2 wins while Carr's out. And then if the offensive line's still terrible, Carr's probably going to get hurt again. But so that's the game. It's very stressful and very deflating, and the Saints just imploded and gave up a 17-point loss, and it's just very depressing. But let's go over some stats here real quick, and then I'll go through my player of the game hot takes and game pick here. So Derek Carr, people were trying to say like, oh, he wasn't doing great or what wasn't looking good anyways before he got hurt. But I mean, he was 13 for 18 for 103 yards and a touchdown before he got hurt. So he was being a game manager before he went out and got hurt. And then he was had a 104.6 quarterback rating. So he was pretty good, honestly, at least before he went out. He was doing a good job of managing the game, which Jameis Winston just wasn't able to do that as well. Wasn't able to pick up any first downs. It seemed like they basically abandoned the running game once Carr went out as well, which didn't make sense when you have a backup quarterback coming in and you have a 17-point lead. But then Jameis Winston, he was 10 for 16 with 101 yards, and he had no touchdowns, at least no turnovers, but only an 80.5 quarterback rating. So he wasn't amazing. His numbers were similar to Carr's, but they weren't as good. And he definitely wasn't picking up any first downs besides on his first drive and then the last drive where they missed the field goal. He didn't pick up like any first downs hardly in the game. And then running, Kendra Miller, I said Kendra Miller, he was looking good in this game. Him and Tony Jones Jr. were starting to kind of heat up in the third quarter. I thought they were going to start to put it on the Green Bay Packers running the ball, but then Derek Carr goes out and they pretty much abandon the running game. But Kendra Miller, he had 9 carries for 34 yards with a 3.8 yard average with a 19 yard long. Didn't have any touchdowns or fumbles. Tony Jones Jr. had 8 carries for 31 yards with a 13.9 yard per carry average with a 19-yard long, which I think that's the longest run by like a official running back, not Taysom Hill, but an official running back this year. So when they were doing those pitch plays and had Kendra Miller bouncing it outside and stuff like that, I thought they were really starting to get something going in the running game. And then Taysom Hill only had 4 carries. People know the statistic behind that. When Taysom Hill doesn't have more than 7 carries or 9 carries in a game, then Saints usually don't win here recently. That's been the recent history, I believe. But he only had 4 carries for 4 carries for 12 yards and a 3-yard average and a 6-yard long. But he had like a 14 or 15-yard run called back because Michael Thomas was holding on the play, but he didn't have any touchdowns and didn't fumble or nothing. And then Rashid Shaheed had 1 carry for no yard. He didn't pick up anything on the play. But then your receivers, it's still kind of your 3-headed monsters. That's what you're looking for in this game. Would have been your 3-headed monsters, but with Olave, Michael Thomas, and Rashid Shaheed, but Rashid Shaheed didn't really show up in this game. Maybe they weren't targeting him enough or weren't designing plays for him enough. But Chris Olave, he was great again. He's putting up numbers that reflect like one of the best receivers in the league besides touchdowns. He still hasn't scored a touchdown yet, but he had 8 catches for 104 yards, 13-yard average with a 28-yard long, no touchdowns, but that came off of 11 targets. So he was cooking. He was cooking. And then Michael Thomas, looked good too as well. He had 6 catches for 50 yards and 8.3-yard average with 18-yard long and off of 9 targets. So he looked good. And then your running backs, I kind of thought maybe the running backs would get a little more would look a little bit better in this game. You know that maybe Kendra Miller would add to the passing games for the running back, but it actually ended up being Tony Jones Jr. Who had 4 catches for 21 yards with a 5.3 yard average with a 10 yard long, and that came off of four targets. So he caught everything thrown to him. But then no one really else did anything. Kendra Miller had 1 catch for 0 yards off of 1 target, and Rashid Shaheed, who I think they probably kind of messed up here, not getting Rashid Shaheed more involved in the passing game here, or maybe even in the running game, because really Rashid Shaheed, the only play he really made was, it was a big play, the 72-yard kick punt return for a touchdown. But other than that, he was kind of quiet. So he was targeted twice, but didn't get any catches. And then Blake Grupe, we know about Blake Grupe. He was just 1 for 2 on field goals. Had the 25-yard long, but missed the 46-yarder, and was 2 for 2 on extra points. And then Rashid Shaheed had 2 kick returns for 32 yards, and that's a 16-yard average. So he probably would have just been better waving it for a fair catch. And then he had the punt return, and it was actually a 76-yard field goal. I've been saying 72, but it was even longer than that. He had just the one return. I think he called fair catch on the rest of those, and it was a 36-yard return for a touchdown. And then Lou Hedley was a little bit better in this game than he was in the game against Carolina. I can say that, but his average still wasn't that impressive. He had 7 punts with a 41.9 yard average, and 2 inside the 20, and 49 with a 49-yard long. So he was a little bit better. Just overall, he didn't outright shank one for only 30 yards like he did in the game against Carolina. But he was a little bit better. He was okay, I guess. And then on defense, see, they only had 1 sack. People been talking about how great the Saints defense has been, getting sacks and putting pressures on quarterbacks. I think that's something that ended up killing them a little bit in this game, is the fact that they weren't, towards the end of the game, weren't able to put as much pressure on Jordan Love as they would have liked to. But Alontae Taylor had 5 total tackles, 5 solo, and had the lone sack. But he also had 5 pass deflections. Early on in the game, before he started, got a pass interference call on him. He was all over the place, and Jordan Love just continued to try him and kept getting the passes broken up. He wasn't able to actually make a actual play on any of those throws to him, but he was able to knock them away. He wasn't able to get a takeaway from none of them. But it was obviously right by Jordan Love to continue to attack him and continue to target Alontae Taylor, because he ended up drawing one of the biggest plays for the Green Bay Packers, was getting a big pass interference called on him. And then Pete Warner had 11 tackles, 7 solo. And then let's see. And then Lonnie Johnson had just 1 tackle, must have been an assist, and he had the only takeaway of the day, had an interception. And then Isaac Yadam, he gave up the touchdown and got a pass interference called on him. He had 4 tackles, 2 solo, but he had 4 pass up breaks as well. But when quarterbacks continue to target these young defensive backs and not your normal starters, Jordan Love did the right thing and continuing to target them, because it ended up getting pass interference calls and eventually getting a touchdown off of Isaac Yadam due to it. But anyways, let's go over player of the game and hot takes and game picks here. So I thought my player of the game was going to be Kendra Miller. I thought he was going to have 100 yards from scrimmage, and it looked like he was kind of on that track. He was on that track because they started to run the ball and started looking like they were kind of wearing down the Green Bay Packers defense a little bit. And then Derek Carr got hurt and they pretty much just abandoned the run game completely. But he just ended up having only 34 yards, uh, and that was all just rushing yards because he didn't go anywhere with the catch that he made. And I thought he was going to have 100 yards from scrimmage and a touchdown, but he didn't really get close to that. It looked like I would have liked. I'd like to know what his total would have been if Derek Carr wouldn't have got hurt because I think he was on pace for it before he went out. Maybe would have only had like 60 or 70, but he hardly got any touches, uh, rushing or receiving after the third quarter. And then my hot takes, I go with the first one here. It's yeah, my hot take was that I thought that that the Saints were going to get the only turnover off of Jordan Love this season, the first turnover off of him this year, and they did. He hadn't lost a fumble, he hadn't thrown an interception this year, and even with how this game was going, 17-point lead, uh, the Saints didn't turn the ball over, but Green Bay Packers did, and had a bunch of penalties called them against them, and the Saints still found a way to lose this game. But yeah, he did. He threw his first interception of the season, had his first turnover of the season. Lonnie Johnson Jr. picking him off on a play that he just threw it deep and just kind of threw it up for grabs. And uh, Lonnie Johnson Jr. came down with that interception. So got the hot take right. Didn't get very close with the player of the game, and then with the score here, this was before all the injuries came out and inactives came out right before the game on Sunday. So this would have been on Friday. I picked the Saints to lose this game because I thought they were dealing with too many injuries in the secondary, injuries, suspensions with Marcus May out due to suspension and Paulson Adebo out with an injury, and then the run game and pass protection may not be as good without Boston Monroe, and I already picked the Saints to lose this game anyways. I picked them to lose 19 to 23 to 19. I picked Green Bay to win, so my score was pretty close. The Saints scored just two less points than that, and Green Bay scored what, five less points than that. I was pretty close to getting that, even the score right, but I picked the winner correctly. I've said it before. I would have been more than happy to be wrong on that prediction. So I got my hot take and the game pick right, but wasn't really close to getting the player of the game right. But I would have rather been wrong on all of those and the Saints win, honestly, and obviously not wanting Derek Carr to get hurt. But uh, to say that after each win this year, the first 2 weeks, I've been saying, oh, I'm excited about the next game, and I can't wait to see the Saints play the Titans. I can't wait to see the Saints play the Carolina Panthers. I can't wait to see the Saints play the Green Bay Packers. Honestly, can't say I'm overly excited about this next game coming up with the more than likely possibility with Jameis Winston starting, because we all know what happened in the last game that Jameis Winston started against his own team. I think he threw a couple interceptions, one of them being a pick six, and the Saints got pretty much handled by the by the Buccaneers, his former team. So, I'm here for it. I'm here for it, and I'll be back for the injury report. But let's hopefully we have a good storyline. Hopefully the NFL has a good script wrote up to where Jameis Winston can win this game without getting his ACL torn, or he can not lose this game without turning the ball over a couple times and actually beat his former team like a solid win where he's the full-time starter in this game. But anyways, I think that's all I have for you this evening. So can I get a check, please? And who dat?